do it.
All right.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Ready. Okay. Let's start with tone. Let's start with tone, because tone is really at the base of
Yeah.
everything, right?
Yeah.
It's the only thing that matters. Actually, that is a pun, because tone is the only thing that matters.
That might be the best Cairo joke I've ever heard.
Chirophysics, that's broad spectrum
Existential.
existential. Yeah, but that's not really the word I was going for. But anyway, existence. Anyway, tone. So tone is really the original essence of something, right? And so we could say tone when it comes to the tone when we're used to palpating through a system, because we talk about soft connective tissue tone, we talk about muscle tone, we talk about bone tone. And what we're feeling for in those places is the tone, is the original essence of those tissues, right? It's the essence of a bone tone, the essence of muscle, the essence of soft connective tissue or fascia. Tone itself is also the tone of a being, the tone of a being before they express as their personality, before they express as the human that we perceive them as. The tone of who they are underneath that is also quite different sometimes from the expression on top of it. Because just if we can experience the fact that there is distortion in tone through the soft connective tissue or the muscle or the bone, there can be a distortion in the expression of tone from a person's essence, from their true essence, to how they are seen or perceived either by others or of themselves. And so tone is really, yes.
Question.
Yeah.
Do people have a consistent, like not individual persons, but do people have a similar, if not nearly exact tone at our essence? Or do you feel like that too, we each have our signature tone, which is different from a
collective tone?
Yeah.
To me, everyone has their very own unique essence.
Okay. And so their very own unique essence is expressed before they come into physical expression.
Or
and then
underlies their whole expression.
Okay.
The essence of the tone of who we are is going to determine everything else on top of it. And so if we're saying, the difference between someone being alive or dead is either they're expressing through the interface for consciousness that they are, or they're not. And it's their tone, it's their essence, it's the underlying organizational factor, let's say, for everything to be coherent on top of that or not. And so when someone's tone can express incoherence with how and what it is from its source, then we see coherence on top of that, physiologically, mentally, emotionally. There's a coherent state because the origin tone of that whole system is able to express in a way that's most attuned to the being that it's related to. When we start to see distortions in someone's expression, that the tone is not getting to express the way that it is from its source, that's when we start to see incoherence or dissonance or distortion, physically, chemically, emotionally. And I would say, yes, sure, there's a collective field, when we talk about the field, tone is also something that precedes anything. It's what everything arises from. And so tone itself, as a collective tone, to me, is really just the field. That's the collective space that we all emerge from. And then there is, well, as there is with a symphony, there's still individual instruments creating a collective piece of music. And so each human in that, of course, has their own tone and vibrational signature.
Okay, so we have essence, we have tone. Great.
And so tone in that sense is just the original essence of something. Tone is the note that they are. And on top of that, then we've got resonance. And resonance in itself is just the matching of two tones. Like resonance is when two or more things meet in a way that's harmonic. And so resonance is the result of harmony between two tones. And so in In practice, we can talk about resonance and that it's a space where if we are in a resonant state with ourselves, with our own tone, with our own expression, and in a state of harmony with our own being and existence, then we have the capacity to be a space where, for people on the tables, if we can meet them in a place and not meet them, not match our tone to theirs necessarily, but be in our tone so fully, in a space of resonance, what that offers then is a resonant space for other people's systems to respond to from the inside out in a way that gets to match our harmonic vibration that allows a whole different other something to unfold. Because it's like having to if you have, and I think actually Sue spoke about this in a talk that she did, I don't know, forever ago. I think it was for BGI staff, because I only saw a recording of it, when she was talking about the difference between monotonal music and polytonal music, and that really ancient music was monotonal. It was one note and then another and then another. But the beauty of that is that when two notes met in a particular harmonic way, a third tone would emerge. That is not a tone or a note you could find, on a keyboard, let's say, or on a fretboard, but the harmony between the two of them produced a whole third something. And it's in that space because that whole third something is where the potential actually is. It's where something else that had never existed before gets to start existing now. And resonance is what allows for is how we describe the harmonic match between two tones. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I didn't know that this is what we were going to be talking about, and I'm kind of like I'm afraid to change the topic because I don't think I've heard you speak about this before, or maybe I have and I just didn't. Anyway, I certainly don't have a recording of it. And
Yeah.
so I want to go back
Mm-hmm.
and have you re-say, not the same words, not the same things, but there was a bit in there about us as the chiropractor, the practitioner, the person who is holding space, creating
Mm-hmm.
space, whatever. We probably don't want to use holding space because that sounds very like
Right.
stable and like
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
stagnant. It sounds stagnant.
Yeah.
Keeping space maybe is kind of nice. And so we are the space keepers. That's kind of cool. I'm going to get uniforms. And for our space keeping mission,
Yeah.
our our objective, our charge is to be as fully expressive of our innate resonance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Our innate tone, our innate expression. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in doing so, that
Mm-hmm.
then keeps the space in a dynamic and kind of permissive version that allows for.
That allows for a whole new unfolding. Allows for an emergence of something that was previously dormant. Yeah. And so, yes, so to repeat what you just said over the side of the screen, is that as if we're talking about being the space, really, is what we're talking about. Because even on a physiological level, and I know we spoke about this a few years ago with in the Prosecco Castle, is that even matter, when we break it down, is just 99.99999% space. We in essence are space. And we are the space that all potential has the possibility to emerge from. But it's very difficult for us to be that space if we are in judgment of our own existence. Now, in those cases, we're often not space. we're
Mm,
quite densely bound, or we're controlled in our expression, or we're limited in our allowance, or we are seeking approval from the outside in to tell us what we are or are not allowed to do.
mhm,
Which I think is fair to say within chiropractic, or as chiropractors, we're taught very particular ways of not how we are allowed to be in practice necessarily, but of what is allowed within practice.
mhm.
And with how to see and be, in practice. And in some cases, actually, yeah, there's whole scripts that practices run off. you know. And I'm not saying that it's not valuable to have some kind of outline for this is what we're about and this is the language that we use to say it. But when we start scripting ourselves, we're no longer necessarily pulling from, drawing from, or expressing from the truth really of what our tone and what our essence has to say, or the capacity that it has to see outside of maybe the scripts or the lenses of analysis that we've been offered. But when we can allow ourselves to be full stop, because being a human being is quite different than being a human doing, and being a human being requires a lot of allowance of number one, listening to everything that gets in the way of our willingness to just be and be present, but in that space of being, in that space of allowing ourselves to show up with no expectation of how we're going to be perceived, how we think we should be showing up, what we think we are or aren't allowed to do, but really embodying that space of the fact that we are the space that consciousness expresses and experiences through. And if we can show up being the space that experience has the opportunity to emerge from, in that space of meeting ourselves in a space of resonance where we are not expecting ourselves to have to do or perform or create something with a potential outcome or appease or please. If we can show up with such a space of resonance in and of our own existence, that's a vibrational field in and of itself. And when we can be in a space of resonance with our own existence and meet ourselves in a space of harmony, vibrationally, that's what we start to offer in the spaces around us. And so it's the people on the table then, it's their systems from the inside out going, meeting and matching that resonance and going, oh, maybe I can also be in resonance with my own existence. Maybe I also can be allowed to exist no matter what. And in a way that's never existed before, because obviously no human has ever existed before. And if you don't have all of the instruments playing in the symphony like they're meant to be playing, then we don't get the beautiful arrangement that's possible within humanity. We get a lot of instruments copying other instruments, and a violin should never try and be a trumpet.
Please do.
I remember Sue saying at one point, when you're working with multiple people at once, and she's saying at some point you'll start to notice that one of the people on the table will become the resonator for the room, and that's kind of setting a whole momentum and tone and fluidity, and everyone now is riding the same wave, so to speak, or everyone is surfing the same wave in their own way. And I think in Sue's beautiful humility in lots of ways, she accidentally left herself out of the equation. And the truth is, in that space, she was the resonant holder. She was that, because she was there showing up with such allowance, such curiosity, such openness, in her own experience of, well, I don't know, what if, I don't know what if, I don't know, but if I'm willing to follow and feel, what can happen? And that's truly the only place that anything new will ever emerge from. Because if we know what's going to happen, if we can predict it, if we are driving towards an outcome, we've already collapsed everything down into a limited scope of probability. We've removed ourselves completely from the opportunity of potential. And Sue's willingness to show up and practice, not knowing, willing to follow what she could feel, not really knowing what that was either to begin with, because of course she had no geometry to follow. The geometry emerged because she was willing to listen. But to be willing to listen, you have to be willing to listen to yourself, and you have to be willing to listen to yourself above all else, not just at the tables, but in every avenue of life. And it was her willingness to show up in that space and be so in resonance with what else she felt was possible, even though she didn't know at the beginning how or what was going to happen, that made her the resonant space in that moment, because she was a space emitting full resonance with her own existence, that every system around her then was able to go, oh, maybe I could too, and I think that is the power of showing up in practice, willing to be full stop, and willing to be curious and willing to question, and willing also to notice where we're looking for the answers and where we want to be able to give answers that sometimes are impossible to give, or where we expect ourselves to be able to answer questions that actually, if we understood more about everything when it comes to matter and physics and blah, 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 we would stop expecting to know any of them at all and realize there's so much more that we don't know. And in our allowance of not knowing, we also give the people on the table the allowance to not have to know before they allow themselves to be. They don't have to know a plan, they don't have to know the outcome. All they have to know that is that in the willingness to be the space in every present moment, they become the space for potential in every present moment. Because if we can listen in every present moment, and allow something to come to the surface through us, that is the power of the present moment, is that in every moment is the potential for something completely different to happen.
Absolutely.
If we're willing to let it happen through us.
So how would you put, so we've got tone, we've got resonance. Now we're going to go to vibration.
Yep. And
Okay.
so vibration is really, vibration is the physical play out of something within that energetic world, because we have frequency and vibration, right? And so frequency is just telling us about the characteristic that tone is carrying, because it will be frequency that tells us about the information that's being carried in that vibrational wave. And so, because for instance, in BGI, we have a beautiful geometric map, and in that map, we have 6 levels, and in those level, and in the whole geometry is a myriad, a million different ways of pattern expression, right? And so, how is it that one pattern of ones can be totally different to the next pattern of ones, yet the tone of the ones is the same? We can feel ones, we can feel two, da da da. But then how is it that within those ones we can have so many different patterns of what seems like the same thing? But each one of them is so different, and their characteristics are so different, and the information they carry is so different. And it's frequency. It's frequency that tells us the characteristic of the tone, and vibration. Vibration is just the vibration is the most physical thing that we can feel. It's like the end point of all of it. It's the information. It tells us about the information that's being carried through a system. And so, for instance, if you have, if you have an A, and I'm just looking at the piano over there, I'm like, so if you have an A note on a piano in one octave, and you have an A note on a different octave on the piano, they're both the same tone. They're both the same note. But the one up here could be playing really fast and a much higher pitch, but it's still an A note. And the one down here could be playing very slowly and very deeply and have a whole different characteristic of expression. One could be joy and one could be grief, but they're actually the exact same tone or note. It's just the characteristic of frequency that's creating the vibrational form of the wavelength that we are perceiving. And so it's frequency that's telling us the characteristic of what that information is, and it's vibration. It's the vibration that we are feeling. It's the vibration that we can perceive or listen to. It's the thing that we can read. It's the thing that makes everything that was previously invisible, or unhearable. It's what gives it form, let's say, for us to start to tune into. Does that make sense?
I think so. And so, vibration versus tone, how would you distinguish and individuate those?
So tone is what exists before anything's expressed. Before, you don't even have to hit the A note on a piano to know that when it is hit, the tone
what it's going to be
was already an A. Now it's being expressed. That's the only difference. The reason that we can hear the expression is because that when it is hit, now that wavelength carrying the frequency turns into a vibrational waveform, and that vibrational waveform is what we are perceiving. It's energy moves in waves. Energy actually moves in spirals, because a wave is just a 2-dimensional spiral, just so we're all clear. If you take what looks like a wave on a piece of paper, or you take a spiral and turn it on its side, a wave is just a 2-dimensional spiral. Everything in the universe is spirals, which I think we have to remember. And I know we will have just spent many days talking about in the castle, because this is going to be a lot about spirals. And so tone is what is before any kind of expression, but it determines what is going to be expressed.
The film you're about to see has no characters, it has no people. It is a film to describe to you and explain visually the effect of cymatic frequencies on texture, structure, water, oil. If you spare a little of your imagination as you watch this film as it runs, you will see many things that answer many questions. You will see living forms, living amoeba, almost animal-like creatures. You will see continents being formed, the Earth itself coming into existence, explosions, eruptions, atomic explosion and bombs. You can see all this and watch it before your eyes. But everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound. Sound is the factor which holds it together. Sound is the basis of form and shape. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. Into the great voids of space came a sound, and matter took shape.
And it's the wavelength or the frequency that determines how the expression takes form, and it's the vibrational movement of energy that makes it perceptible to us.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Sure.
What is also very nice is that you brought up something that I had forgotten we need to talk about.
Okay,
So
great.
I have written that down.
Yes.
And I've sent it to you, so we have it for safekeeping. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but
Okay.
that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. So is there anything else you would like to add about frequency, tone, resonance, vibration?
I think what's so powerful about understanding these kind of four, because really when you understand these four principles, what it's telling us is how to understand the mechanics of the field, right? Because we are taught a lot about how to understand the mechanics of the body, whether it's through neurology, whether it's through our musculoskeletal awareness. We're taught a mechanical understanding of the body, still with a vitalistic mindset, right? That if you're adjusting the subluxation, it's going to affect the nerve system and blah, 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 the whole story. We know what that is. But the way that we are taught to read that through the body is physically mechanical. And it requires not that it requires, it is only a physical understanding that we are given to interpret the body through. But when we say, well, nothing in the universe is actually matter, nothing is solid, that immediately debunks everything or every way that we have been taught to read this system. Mm-hmm. Because when the only way we've been taught to understand it or to feel it or to analyze it is as if it's solid, and we're saying, well, actually, the body is not solid, then anything that we have been taught to interpret the system through as if the body's solid, it's not that it's incorrect, but it's very incomplete. And gives us a pretty limited picture. And so and this is why, BGI is not a technique. All it's doing is going, well, actually, yeah, the body does organize itself that way in the solid bits that we can see. But what we can see is ultimately organized by something that we cannot see. And if we really want to get to the root of what's going on here, of what is observable, we have to know how to palpate the unobservable. And to do that, here's the four most important things. Here's the four most important elements of mechanics when it comes to the field, because the body is just a field. It's just the field in a more condensed form. But the exact same rules of engagement still apply. And if we can understand those four factors, it then becomes a whole different understanding of what's going on here, what's organizing, how it's expressing, how it is that we can listen to that expression or not. And it's those things that start to give us the lens of how to see the body really as a hologram of the whole universe. And if we then start to play in that space, then you really start to see how BGI is not a technique, because the universe is not a technique. It's inherently unpredictable, and it's all about expression, and it's here for creativity. But unless we have something in our lens that's helping us read it and understand it that way, it's very easy to default to seeing it as a physical structure that we're trying to address from the outside in, ultimately. And it's very easy to leave ourselves out of the picture also, because when we're not understanding that space of resonance and tone as being the base of everything, ourselves included, it's very easy to fall into that I'm me, they're them, how can I serve them? And we're falling back into a very well-meaning and super well-intended space of engagement, but we've kind of lost in that space how to be the space and what really can be and potentialize from that realm. And I think tone and resonance and vibration and frequency are the pieces in the lens that have been missing, are the beautiful pieces that Sue was bringing to the table, and are the pieces that in some cases are the most elusive and difficult to understand, because naturally learning how to trust and feel something that you can't see is much harder, because what we have to do in that process is learn how to trust ourselves, and that's a whole different little piece of the puzzle.
When you were talking about the matter versus space, and thinking back to the castle a couple years ago, and also just how fascinating it is that we have convinced ourselves, like we've basically given ourselves a convention that somehow it makes more sense to focus on the 1%
Yes.
instead of the 99.9999%.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and yet we feel like we have to convince somebody that it makes more sense to get the information from here. I hadn't ever thought about that, so it's kind of interesting. Thanks.
And it's like you say, it's the 1%, but it's not. It's the 0.
Yeah, it's not even
0.001%, you know. But it's the most, and especially when we also have to remember that we are a collective humanity, and humanity collectively has been working on some pretty hardcore survival patterns for a really, 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 really long time. And we know even within the nervous system, you can't be in a state of rest and digest and running away from the tiger at the exact same time. We know even on that level, the nervous system won't do both at once. It does one or the other. And so in a humanity that has been pretty restricted to a survival state for a really long time, the mind in that state wants certainty, it wants predictability, it wants something that has an outcome that we know is going to be favorable. We know that it's going to be a part of helping us survive. And I think that feeds in and has fed into a lot of the limitation that we've been operating in, because when we're in that state as a collective, there's very little reason, and very little space or capacity in some ways to step out of needing the answers, because that need for the answer is just a need for certainty. And when we're in a survival state, our mind wants to be certain that we're going to survive, and the way, of course,
absolutely,
that translates into practice is that we want to know that things are going to happen, and we want to know that we're going to have a business, and we want to know that people are going to come back. And there's all of these things that, whether we realize it or not, we also have and do run out of survival. But fear is very good at disguising itself as sensible decisions, and very tricky like that. And it can disguise itself as all kinds of logic, or being reasonable, or doing things that we think need to be done in order to make something happen. And it becomes, then it certainly did for me, I needed to give my mind a lot to get it out of the way. So when it came to these concepts of physics and these concepts of understanding this stuff, I needed to give my mind as much tangibility for the intangible as it had been given in the 5 years of chiropractic college about the tangible, because it's still that 0.00001% is really convincing, and it's observable. And when you don't think you know what you're doing, it's much easier for someone to tell you that you are, or like, well, now the legs are balanced, now that muscle test is strong, and now I know it's good. But then when you realize we're basing all of that on the 0.00001% of what can be seen or felt, even though it's convincing and it's satisfying in lots of ways, and it appeases also a lot of survival parts of ourselves, even if we don't fully recognize that's where we're actually operating from, you start to appreciate how much limitation there is in that, not just for us, but for the people on our tables. But it really has to start with us being willing to ask the questions, and us being willing to not know and feel pretty uncomfortable for a while, But I say that being like, yeah, that was also my experience. And I'm sure, what was it, 15 years ago now, that I did my very first BGI seminar with Sue, which I imagine there was still a field that was infinitely stronger than when you did your first BGI seminar with Sue. And we both feel like, to many degrees, it was completely in the dark and no one had a clue what was going on. And of course, we see some people in the seminars now, and I'm like, for real, you can just feel that now, you know. And I know and appreciate so much of how the field has changed in general. You know,
Disgusting.
you know, struggle just a little bit, you know. But still with that, still with
Just
the
pretend for my own
yeah,
purposes.
yeah, exactly. And
Out of respect.
out of respect, exactly. It's like being part of an old hospo thing where you still like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you don't do your time washing the dishes, you cannot be the sous chef, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Ridiculous. But that's also, it is the space where even when it becomes, and I've noticed this too, even when people have an easier time, or not an easier time, but sometimes when it is a case of, oh yeah, I can feel that, and it seems so simple and easy, it can also be really easy to disregard the potency in what you're feeling, because I've
Mm,
seen that as well.
sure.
I've seen that as well, where it's like, oh yeah, this and this is that, and fine. Kind of like when you do your very first toggle, and as far as you're concerned, like, meh, what really could happen from that? I can feel it. That's fine, done. But I'm more interested in this deeper, heavier other stuff, you know.
Check.
Yeah, check. Into the same vein, whether it's
No, check. Toggle. I'm done now. I've done a toggle. I'm a toggle master.
great, done. Now I want to do the good stuff, you know. Now I want to do the
Yeah.
crunch. And so I've seen it work both ways as well, where it can feel too hard to try and feel this other way, and then it's kind of disregarded because really how much can be happening.
Mhm.
And then it's almost like, oh yeah, I can feel that, but like not that interesting because I've got no reason to understand how potent and powerful it is that I can feel that, number one, and actually have the experience then to see what really starts to unfold from that place, when there's a lot, especially within the chiropractic model, that can be far more alluring. There's a lot more weight held around other modalities of engagement, which our whole profession operates around, and very easy to disregard the subtleties. And the universe is subtle and it is elegant.
And I'm just thinking, like, I'm having all of these things happen in my brain, and I'm thinking, like, I have, I have felt like it's a great gift that we have given people,
Mm,
that they can feel and understand what they're feeling to some degree pretty
mm-hmm.
quickly, because we've created this very strong field.
Yeah.
However, making it so that really it seems as though, maybe everybody's lying, but if I believe that people are generally telling the truth, it seems as though most people are able to feel it. Then it just seems so easy. It's like, well, how could that be anything if it's that easy? Anyone can do that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And also I think there, because there is a beautiful field now where it's like, yeah, I can hit the note on the piano. I can hear the note. Great, done. I can hear it. And then it's like, okay, but how much can you hear of it? You know, and that's where the conversation of specificity of really, because yeah, sure, you can learn how to palpate an atlas, and at the beginning you're like, well, no, I can't. And you're like, yeah, I can palpate atlas. And it's like, yeah, but how much can you feel under your finger at that atlas? You know, how much rotation, how much distortion, what's the position, even mechanically. And then when it comes to tone, there's so much more nuance that also we assume the same way as like, oh yeah, I can feel the TP of the vertebra. How much else is there to feel? You're like, well, great. I'm glad that you can hear it. And now really listen. Now really, really listen.
Yeah.
Because also our tendency, I think, to feel is also with the intent to try and resolve. And sometimes listening with the intent to resolve
Hmm.
gets in the way of what else there is to
Or
listen
change
to.
or shift.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And sometimes if we think we okay, we can feel it, and we kind of stop there because we can feel it, so now we can address it, let's say. But if we feel it without trying to address it, actually, how much more is there to hear in that space? And I think it's that space when we get to tone that then we really, really start to be able to listen to the system in a far more holographic way, not in a way that's in relation to that one tone about that one pattern, but what that one tone is telling us about the compression of that whole being from their essence. Because it's every being that's been compressed from the essence, from the source of who they are, that's creating the myriad of patterns on the top anyway. It's not the patterns that are compressing their being. Their being was already compressed. That's why there are patterns. And so rather than trying to address the patterns, what can the patterns tell us about the tone of that person's essence and the gap between how that tone was designed to express and play and how it is expressing and playing? Because that's actually where the beauty is, and that's where that's what you can speak to the most. And it's certainly been my experience that, sure, you can tell people all kinds of stuff about what's going on in their body and the physical distortions and how that's playing out. But if you can speak to their being, if you can speak to the gap between how they are experiencing themselves versus how their tone, how their being is designed to experience itself, because people can, well, they know the difference in that. They know the difference in how they are experiencing their life versus how else they feel they could be experiencing it. And that space, I think, is the most potent and powerful one to talk to. Because if it's the essence of who we are that's animating this to begin with, if it's that essence, if it's that tone that we can be attuned to, then it's so much more powerful to be speaking from and allowing that place to be what's coming to the surface than to be concerning ourselves with the patterns that are overlaying it. All very relevant and important, but the patterns are telling us a much different thing, and there's so much more to listen to if we can start to fine tune our nuance of tone in that world.